All right, nested loops, what are they? Well, it's basically when you have a loop inside a loop. So I'm going to trace through two loops and I'm going to show you how we can write some loops as well that are nested. All right, so here we have nested for loops. You have a for loop inside a for loop. You'll notice we have the variables R and C. So when we trace our code, I'm going to set up a column for R and I'm going to set up a column for C. In a nested for loop, you start off with the outer for loop. You initialize your first value, so R gets initialized to 0. You do your test, so 0 less than 3 passes, right? But then I'm not going to do R++ for a relative amount of time. I'm not going to do R++ until I've made it to the end of my braces and then come back around. What am I going to do? Well, the first line in here is going to say, okay, we have another loop. So we kind of put paused on this outer loop until we've done the inner loop and all that stuff inside there. All right, so C starts at its 9, and I'm going to test is 9 greater than 7, and the answer is yes. And so what that means is I come down to this print statement. Now the print statement says print R, well R is 0, print a colon, and print C, which is 9, and then put a space. So just imagine there's a space there. And then that's all that's inside this loop. So now I'm going to do C minus minus and make this 8. And I'm going to test is 8 greater than 7, and the answer is yes. And so now I'm going to print again. What am I printing? I'm printing the value of R. Remember, I did a print statement with a space, colon, and print the value of C. And then I'm going to do C minus minus, which makes this 7. I'm going to test is 7 greater than 7, and the answer is no. So this is going to fail. It's terminated, which means now I move on to this next part of my code, which says print line. So basically it just means move on to a new line. And now that I've finished here, finally I can do R++, which makes this now 1. And now I need to test, is 1 less than 3? And the answer is yes, which means I can enter into this code. And notice C is going to essentially get reset to 9. And I'm going to test, is 9 greater than 7? And the answer is yes. And so because of that, I'm going to print the value of R, which is 1, followed by the colon, followed by C, and then a space. All right. And then now that I've done that, I do C minus minus. And I'm going to test, is 8 greater than 7? The answer is yes. So I'm going to print the value of R and the value of C. And I'm going to do C minus minus, and I'm going to test, and that fails. So once this fails, I move on to a new line. So I'm down here. And finally, I can do R++, which makes this 2. And now let's test, is 2 less than 3? And the answer is yes. And because of that, I can enter into my loop, and you'll notice we reset C to be 9. And test is 9 greater than 7. The answer is yes. Because of that, I'm going to print the value of R, colon, the value of C with a space after. C minus minus. Test is 8 greater than 7. The answer is yes. So I'm going to print the row, colon, the C value. C minus minus makes it 7. And then I'm going to test, is 7 greater than 7? And the answer is no. So this loop fails. So now I do print line, which puts me here. And now this group of code is finished. So now I finally do R++ and make it 3. And let's test, is 3 less than 3? And the answer is no. So we are officially done with this nested loop, and that is our output. Okay, so you are continuously cycling through the inner loop until it fails. Only once it fails, then you change the outer loop, and then you go back and cycle through the inner loop, and once that fails, you change your outer loop counter and then inner loop. So this one is going to iterate through a lot more times than the outer loop. Okay? Let's look at another one. This is another example of a nested loop. I know it's a nested loop because I have a while loop and inside it I have a for loop. That's also valid to have a while loop inside a for loop. You can have a while loop inside a while loop. You can have a for loop inside a while loop, a for loop inside a for loop, a while loop inside a for loop. Basically, any loop inside another loop would be considered a nested loop. All right, so you'll notice that our first line says num is 7, 8, 4, 6, and we're going to go while num does not equal 0. So really quick, here's our tests. Maybe. All right. So that passes that test, right? That's not equal to 0, which means it's safe to come in here. So our first is going to be num mod 10. Remember, this is basically just taking the last digit. So this is going to be 6. And now I'm going to loop starting at 0. And I need a test. Is 0 less than first? So is basically 0 less than 6? And the answer is yes. So I'm going to print a star or an asterisk. And now I'm going to do I++. I'm going to test, is 1 less than 6? And the answer is yes. And then I'm going to do I++, is 2 less than 6? And the answer is yes. So I'm going to print an asterisk and make this, is 3 less than 6? And the answer is yes. Is 4 less than 6? Is 5 less than 6? Is 6 less than 6? And the answer is no. So what did we do? Because this can get pretty tedious pretty quickly. And if you recognize in general what's happening, it's going to make things a lot simpler. So you'll notice that when first was 6, we ended up printing 6 asterisks. So I have a feeling that this is just printing this many asterisks. And so if I can figure out what first is going to be the next time and the time after that, it should shave some tracing time off considerably. And in fact, that's what you want to start to do, is start to figure out what is the pattern that's going on. And that'll save some time when you have to trace code, especially on your AP exam. All right, so I finished this loop. And so now I move on to a new line and I update num to be num divided by 10. Remember, with integer division, there are no decimals. It's just 784. All right, so that's our first iteration. All of that happened in all of this code. I loop back around. Let's test. Let's make sure that this is not equal to 0, and that's true. And so we're going to figure out our first, which remember is really our ones place digit, and that's going to be 4. Now let's see if we can do this without necessarily going through this super long process. But actually I'll do the super long process. But my prediction is that we're going to print 4 asterisks. Let's see if that's the case. So I is going to start out at 0, and this time I don't want to do 0 less than 6. I want to check and see if it's less than 4, in which case it is. And so I'm going to print an asterisk. Remember, we're on a new line. All right, and then I'm going to do I++. Is 1 less than 4? And the answer is yes. So I'm going to print another asterisk. And then 2 is 2 less than 4? And the answer is yes. So I'm going to print another asterisk. And then move to 3. Is 3 less than 4? The answer is yes. So I'm going to do another asterisk. And then is 4 less than 4? The answer is no. So just as I predicted, I am printing 4 asterisks. All right. So I did 6 and then I did 4. Let's continue on and see if we can predict what's going to happen next. I think I already know what's going to happen. That when I divide this by 10, like it says to here, and I loop back around, 78 does not equal 0 passes, I think that I'm going to do 8 asterisks. And then notice I kind of skipped this whole tracing right here because I kind of already figured out what was going on. And that'll save a considerable amount of time, like I said. All right, and then I'm going to do 78 divided by 10. And I'm going to test, is it true that it's not equal to 0? And that's true. And so my first value is going to be 7 mod 10, which is 7. And so again, I predict that this means I'm going to print 7 asterisks, which at this point is not really a prediction because I've kind of shown that. And then I'm going to do num equals num mod 10. 7 divided by 10 is 0. 0 does not equal 0 fails. And so my outer loop fails. And so this will be my output. And so basically I printed 6 asterisks, then 4, then 8, then 7. And like I said, after you did this inner loop, once or twice and you realized what was happening, you kind of didn't need to officially trace because you knew this is going to print n number of asterisks. All right, so that's an example of how you can trace loops. Move over to the next video to see how we can write nested loops.